how much of that last 30 minutes can you remember? It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because where the mind goes, it seems so real in the moment, and then it's gone. It's really quite extraordinary. Swami Satchidananda, the founder of Yogaville here in Virginia, was once asked by a reporter, what is your perspective on this political situation as a Hindu? And Swami Satchidananda says something I will never forget. I've kind of adopted it. He said, I don't think I'm a Hindu. I think I'm an undu. So whenever anyone asks me what I am, I say, I think I'm an undu. And we're all undoing our stories, our fabrications, our projections, our perception of reality to come in contact with what's actually true. That's what this practice is all about. Coming into the recognition of what's true. What is not driven by greed or wanting, what is not driven by aversion or ill will, and what is not confused. What is that? That ephemeral something. That's, to me, what the practice is all about. And every time you come back to the direct experience, you've arrived. It's pretty darn simple. It's just not easy. Cultivating this practice of present moment awareness, of cultivating more of a home where you are observing without judgment, but actually experiencing, is the result of practice, of paying attention, of willful cultivation of some certain mental qualities. It's also about developing your capacity to let be, to let go. And it's also developing your capacity for compassion, to hold the moment. So, with this as the last talk, I thought I'd reflect back on the first talk oh so long ago, and really every talk, every one of these talks, it's all the same talk, as you know by now, if you haven't figured that out. You know, it's all about the fact that suffering is part of the human experience, that there is a cause for our suffering, our stress, our dissatisfaction, that is possible to let go, and that there is a path, there are technologies, there are techniques, there are skillful means to cultivate that process of letting go of where you are bound by stress or suffering or dissatisfaction or unsteadiness. It's really about self-liberation. It's a practice of freeing ourselves. And it's been so touching and so powerful for me to be able to share with you in this group inquiry, because number one, this practice is brutal. If you haven't noticed, it's not easy. And a deep bow to you for staying in the practice, because it just simply isn't easy. And very difficult to do by yourself, and much easier when you're associated with others. So it's just such a deep honor to be able to share this. There's a mythology of a story of a demon who was fed by anger and hatred. And the demon got more and more skillful at injecting anger into different cultures and different people. And then he would feed on that energy. And he got more and more powerful as he got even more skillful at sowing the seeds of disharmony. And the story is that he was invited for tea with a very wise man. And this wise man made him a wonderful meal, who sat with him and tried and worked to make him comfortable. And the demon had no anger that he could feed on. And so the demon became weaker and weaker and weaker in the face of non-judging awareness, non-judging presence. Eckhart Tolle talks about the pain body. If you've heard his talks about how that when you're under stress, when you're angry, there's this pain body. There's this pain in the body, and it's an energy that actually feeds on more pain. And how in our relationships, when there is disharmony, this pain body gets stronger. And you can really feel in what are called the three poisons, if you're not familiar with them, of greed and hatred and delusion, that there's an energy to that, the wanting, the craving, the leaning forward. It's very, very stressful. And when you're caught in aversion or hatred or ill will or judgment, there's a very active, energetic quality of self-protection, of pushing away. And in delusion or confusion as well, your energy is very, very unsteady because you don't have clarity. So awareness bounces around a lot. And any unhappiness in your life is tied to one of these three energies. Something you're wanting that you don't have, something you want to get rid of that won't go away, and delusion, believing things are true that are not really true. So it's helpful to remember this. These two main pillars that the Buddha spoke of, that suffering is part of the human experience, and that there's a source, there's a cause. And when I can be aware of times when I'm triggered or tight or judgmental or self-protective or caught in fear or caught in anxiety, I think maybe I'm a little more quick to recognize that there's a source to that disharmony. And if I can investigate it, there's a possibility I can shift my relationship with it. That's a little bit of what I'd like to talk about tonight. So the bad news is in the first two noble truths. Suffering happens and there's a cause. And then there are the two good news points, the third and fourth, that it's possible to let go, and that there are skillful means that will support you in cultivating your capacity for happiness and your capacity for equanimity and joy. I love a line someone said, I used to be really affected by the sin of pride, but I had a breakthrough, and now I think I'm like the most humble person on the planet. I love stories, and I love stories of transformation. I think we all do. We love to watch, someone change. And I think sometimes with like my own growth, like the waves of resistance and insight, it's basically a 3-act play. If you watch most movies, it's a 3-act structure. And so when I was in college, I was an English composition major, and my best friend Michael and I would watch movies and kind of like call out, end of the first act, beginning of the second act. But in the first act of a movie, the characters get established, and then something happens. And in that something happens, there's some kind of turning point, there's some kind of crisis. And you know that life isn't going to be the same. So it kind of has that drama. So something arrives. There it is. In the second act, that's where the action begins to rise. And there are attempts to solve the problem, and usually the protagonist doesn't have the skills. They fail a number of times, or there's a mentor or a villain that they're working with, and they're learning their lessons and developing their character. And then the beginning of the third act is when the protagonist makes a decision, then they can't go back. There's some definitive thing that they have to give themselves to. And in the face of adversity, there's some breakthrough, there's some letting go. that dramatic question is answered, and the protagonist has a new sense of who they are. Sometimes I drive people crazy when I'm watching a movie. I'll say like, "Oh, beginning of Act 3." It's kind of fun to see how that structure works. And that's kind of how life happens, and that's why I think that the 3-act structure has been around, since the Romans, who really kind of created it. I was working with someone who was in a huge fight with his siblings. They grew up on a really beautiful farm, and after the final death of the parent, the siblings were in a quandary around, do we sell the property or do we keep it? And all the children wanted to keep it, find a way to keep it, except for one. And there were some wounds in the family, and there was one sister who she just wanted out. She wanted payment, and all the others wanted to find some way they could keep it. Maybe someday, one would move back in and have it keep the family homestead. So we were discussing this process, and she had tried again and again negotiating with her sisters, or some way they could borrow money and pay it back, but out of her own woundedness, she would not negotiate. And there was no way that they could just buy the farm and buy her out on her share. And she felt completely stuck. The rest of the family wanted the farm, and she had really deep anger toward her sister. And she basically was locked in. She said, if she wins, I'll never be able to forgive her. I'm going to hate her forever. It's permanently poisoned our family. They had brought in other uncles to negotiate. Nothing was happening. And finally, she said, this is intolerable. I can't live with this. And this was the beginning of Act 3, where she gave herself to the question, how can I let this go? Something had to shift. And since the externals couldn't shift, she only could focus on the internals. And part of the process was recognizing what was happening for her. This incredible grief at losing the family farm that she loved, grief around the rift in her family, and some deep rage at her sister. And as she slowly named all those different layers of what was between her and feeling free around this, she finally got to a place of doing a role reversal with her sister, of really trying to imagine what her sister was feeling. And when she did that, she got in touch with the deep hurt that her sister was feeling. And she was slowly able to recognize the validity of her sister's feelings. She didn't let go all at once, but there was the beginning of a very, very important thaw where they could actually begin to see and meet each other. And I think we all go through that 3-act process a lot. Something arises, we resist it, it gets stronger, it gets more intense, we look at what different ways we can fix it or control it, and at some point we have to explore, how can I let this go? It becomes unbearable. The stress, the discomfort finally is so strong, you have no choice but to turn your attention toward it, to name it, have tea with it, and really investigate how you're holding it, the beliefs that you have, that you're holding on, the capacity to imagine the other's feeling. And that begins to create a shift in consciousness. Pema Chodron has this great little story that she tells. A young woman wrote to me about finding herself in a small town in the Middle East, surrounded by people jeering, yelling, threatening to throw stones at her and her friends because they were Americans. Of course, she was terrified. And what happened to her is interesting. Suddenly, she identified with every person throughout history who had ever been scorned and hated. She understood what it was like to be despised for any reason: ethnic group, racial background, sexual preference, gender. Something cracked wide open, and she stood in the shoes of millions of oppressed people and saw with a new perspective. And she even understood her shared humanity with those who hated her, the sense of deep connection, of belonging to the same family. This is the story of letting go. Our capacity to open to what is true, and at the same time to hold it with compassion. There's another story I heard of a little kid who just loved candy. Really, really loved candy, and his mother got this little jar, little clay jar, and put the candy in there as a way of, just sort of keeping all the candies where this little boy could go and get the candy he wanted. And he put his hand in, but he couldn't get his hand out. And they tried everything they could to get his hand out, but his hand wouldn't come out. Finally, they called the fire department. And the fire department came, and they broke the vase. And the reason why his hand wouldn't come out is because he was filled with candy. That kind of describes us. The hanging on and the ability to let go. That grip. So when we let go, we open to possibilities we really can't even imagine. I had a phone call with a friend I hadn't seen in a long, long time. We go back many, many, many years, back to the ashram, and they were a married couple, and they were very connected, and they became Ayurvedic practitioners, and they lived in exotic places around the world, and some of the most alive people that I had met. But I fell out of touch. I hadn't heard from them in a long time. And finally, through some connection, a word got to me that Carrie was on Kauai, and so we had a phone call, and I found out that his wife Wendy had died, and she got a tumor, and it was a kind of a long process where he supported her through her journey of letting go. It was such a shock, such a young, vibrant, really vibrant, some of the most alive people I've ever met. And he said when she died, something in me died too. And in his process of being in that deep, deep letting go, kind of that unexpected letting go of a vibrant, alive, young life partner, he's now in a space of reimagining his life, of who he is, informed by that relationship, but without it. And this practice of letting go on this level, I find to be excruciating, because we all have those that are close to us. And as we awaken to the awakening of heart and mind, as is described as bodhichitta, sort of the awakened heart, awakened mind, particularly when it comes to letting go of those we most love, those who are closest to us. The wisdom faculty is remembering that everyone dies. We know that. The compassion piece comes in the capacity to do it. to be fully awake to the process. When he described what it was like, for him to let go of his wife, I couldn't help in my own meditation reflect on what it would be like to lose my wife, to lose Tara. And it was quite a gripping practice, because those who are closer in, it's very, very hard. It's one thing to hear about breast cancer statistics. When it's someone in your family or someone close, suddenly there's a grip, there's a clutch. In some traditions, there is a classic meditation on the decomposing body. The tantric yogic practitioners would meditate where at the charnel grounds, where the bodies were burned. And it's a kind of a grueling thing, but also a very, very helpful practice. So in my life, I've been around a lot of death. Growing up on a farm, I remember when I was a kid, someone came out and said, "So what are the names of all your animals?" And I thought, no, we don't name these animals. They're coming and going too quickly. But I've had a friend, a couple people, die in my arms, and to not turn from that process of passing is truly, truly life-changing. Perhaps we can do just a short reflection on this. If you like, you can close your eyes. You might take a moment to sense the breath. And you might bring your attention to someone in your life that has passed. And you might just take a moment to feel and imagine this person alive and happy and vibrant. And at the same time, recognizing the fact that they are no longer in form. And just noting this quality of the recognition of change and impermanence. And at the same time, reflecting on this person's goodness, their life. And sensing, if you like, to offer them some kindness, some compassion. And sensing what it's like to acknowledge both change and a quality of presence in the heart. And if you like, you can deepen the breath. The awakened heart and mind is the flowering of both wisdom and compassion. It's said that there are two levels of what's called bodhichitta. One is called unconditional bodhichitta, which is just being present without any concept, without any opinion, where you're free from the ups and downs. As the third Zen patriarch said, life is not difficult for those who have no preferences. The capacity to simply hold the moment without judgment That is the quality of unconditional bodhicitta. And the second is what you could call relative bodhicitta, which is keeping your heart and mind open to suffering without shutting down. And of course, that becomes very, very challenging. Personally, when there's conflict, to keep your attention open to the suffering, to the stress, without shutting down. It's a practice. And part of the practice is the practice of compassion. Cultivating compassion for yourself, your capacity for empathy, to feel, to wish other people well. I saw this, just this little blurb about a man in a suburban neighborhood who every day would walk his dogs and everyone knew him. And he was suffering with leukemia and getting weaker and weaker, but still insisted on walking his dogs, but he would just get tired. And the entire neighborhood put out chairs by the road for him. It was just so amazing to see this entire neighborhood filled with chairs so that any time when he walked the dogs, he could have a seat. There's something about that where we all feel touched. The capacity of empathy, of reaching out. There's a story as well, which I find kind of incredible, of the Tibetan monks who were tortured in Chinese prisons. And after they were released, they shared of how their practice was praying for their torturers and trying not to die so their torturers wouldn't be burdened with that karma. That's probably a little bit beyond my capacity. But as a hypothetical, wow, to have that quality of selflessness would be amazing. So you can cultivate bodhicitta through acts of kindness, so cultivating compassion. There's a wonderful book called The 5 Languages of Love. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Basically, what the book says is that we give and receive love in 5 basic ways. And we usually have a really strong preference for 1 or 2. We're really inclined. And we tend to show our affection for others through the way that we like to receive, because we just assume everyone's like us. So here are the 5 languages of love. 1 is touch. The second is words of affirmation. The third is quality time. The 4th is gifts. And the 5th is acts of service. So I'd like to do just a short reflection once again, and give you a little time to kind of go through these, and you might just sense what touches you the most. Do you like to be physically touched? Do you find that words of affirmation are healing and enlivening for you? A sense of having quality, exclusive time with another, where you're not distracted? And do you like to receive gifts? Or do you find acts of service is most touching for you? And just take a moment, and you might just reflect for a moment of those in your life, like in your inner circle. Is there a sense of what they would most respond to? To touch, words of affirmation, quality time, gifts, or acts of service? And then when you're ready, you can deepen the breath, let your eyes open. I can't help but ask, how many of us find touch to be really, really important, primary? Wow. So notice that people, you can rub their shoulders and we have tea afterward. Words of affirmation. Awesome. Quality time? Yeah. Gifts? Be honest. And acts of service. Yeah, wow, this is actually a pretty even distribution. Yeah. I have found this to be so helpful. And it makes for a fantastic conversation with those that you're most intimate with. Because you might be surprised over what people really, really like. It becomes a very, very quick way to respond when people are under stress. Oh yeah, this is what would help. So giving is really at the core of all these teachings. One of the very first things the Buddha taught was about generosity. That when you give, you are loosening up the sense of I and mine. And in that, there's a very powerful transformation. So as you explore this sense of cultivating an awakened heart, awakened mind, or bodhichitta, there are a number of things that are supportive in that. One is to remember that no matter how lost you are, coming back can be pretty simple. Even when you are torn away by strong winds, it can be helpful to remember that they're impermanent. And the more you practice, the more confident you will be that in all the fluctuations of your life, that you can be with it, that you can actually be present to what is true, and to open your heart again and again. Not perfectly, not all the time. So I'd mentioned before that when I give a talk, I ask myself, why is this important? And what am I excited about you taking away from this? And I added another one, just to kind of like amp it up a little bit. As this is our kind of my last time here until September, I remember I was once talking with Tara, and I had a Dharma talk. I had nothing, and I said, I'm blank. I can't think of anything. I don't know where to start. And she said, well, if you knew you were going to die next week, what would be important? And so I thought about that. And so I threw that inquiry as well. If this was our last time encountering each other, what would I want to say? I think the first thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you for your presence in this chaotic world we live in. To share a communal intention to pause and to reflect and to open. It really is a point of light. So to share this with you has been just a profound journey. There are a number of bumper sticker phrases that anyone can use. But there's one particular teaching I ran across that was really helpful for me, and I come back to it. And it's just two words. Keep going.